we're going to focus on how all of you can get unmuted today. And I want to share a story about a time in my life that I would imagine that many of you can relate to in some way when I was a very muted version of myself, even literally. It was September of 2016, and I had a dream that I was drowning. Those are the dreams you wake up from and you're like, I'm glad that was just a dream. You know what I'm talking about, those dreams you wake up from, you're like, I'm glad that was just a dream? I have other dreams when I'm married to Ryan Gosling or Chris Evans, and then I wake up and I'm like, I love my husband, he's my college sweetheart, we've been together 16 years, but I'm like, that was just a dream. So I wake up from this dream, and I write about it in my journal, and then I did what a lot of us do, I just kept living my life. And I didn't take it as the sign that it was. And about a month later, I started having trouble with my memory, which was concerning because I was only 32 years old. And so naturally, I did what all of us do, right? You go to Google. And I'm like, well, clearly I have dementia at 32. I mean, there's an issue here. So I went to my doctor, and he told me 5 words that most of us never want to hear. He said, maybe you're doing too much. And I thought that that was an interesting thing for him to say, because I don't think he understands that I have a different capacity, right? We all have a different capacity than other people to handle things. And so I ignored his advice, and I kept moving on. And then I had the worst sore throat of my life, swollen lymph nodes. I was sicker than I'd ever been 2 months later, and I completely lost my voice. So this dream of drowning was an indicator that I should have paid attention to, but I didn't. And then several months after that, I ended up on Valentine's Day, when I was supposed to be at dinner with my husband, back at that doctor's office, where I was diagnosed with Epstein-Barr virus, which is an acute form of mono. And after that experience, I had realized, here I was, by the way, the director of well-being, and I had completely burned out at the age of 32. And this is what I felt like. Maybe anybody feel like this right now? You're like, is there anything left? We're just exhausted. And I missed out on moments that matter, like so many of us do, and we're just pushing ourselves along, and we're ignoring all of the signs and symptoms and signals. This is my sweet little niece, Raleigh, and I missed her 2nd birthday party because I was sick as a dog on the couch. And my husband was sending me pictures and videos, and I remember laying there thinking to myself, this is not how I want my life to look like. So I had to be silenced, literally, in order to come into a place where I could become unmuted. I felt like so many of us feel, where we show up in the world and we don't necessarily share what we think or we feel. We don't want to be a burden. We don't want to impose on people, right? We don't want to be a bother. Meanwhile, people ask us for help all the time. We're like, of course I'll do that. I'm literally drowning, but yeah, I'll take that on. Sure, why not? Meanwhile, our body or something in us is saying, don't say yes to that. Who's had that moment recently where you're like, don't say yes to that, and you said yes? Anybody had a moment like that? Yeah, okay, just so we can normalize. Okay, great. I'm in good company. We don't share our feelings or our thoughts or ideas because we're afraid of what people will think of us. And we literally mute ourselves. If you don't do it at work, you do it at home, or you do it in relationships, or you do it with your body. All of us have some area of our lives that we mute, and it's kind of like we show up like this. We're like, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. But behind the scenes, we're not. And so what we're going to do today is we are going to shift out of that way of living into a way that is ignited and awakened and alive and vibrant. That is what's possible when we live an unmuted life. So in just a moment, y'all are going to have the opportunity to connect with each other. And for those that are joining, there's folks that are joining us remotely as well. And so there's going to be different ways when all you are doing stuff in the room here. We're going to have something for them to do that I'll put up on the screen as well. So the practice we're about to do is an opportunity for all of you to unmute yourselves. Because I think it would be kind of ridiculous if I stood up here and talked at you for 75 minutes and you didn't get to talk, right? That would kind of defeat the purpose. So you're going to be invited to unmute yourselves and share and talk and connect several times today. Because that's part of the reason you're in this community, right? Who was with us for the virtual kickoff? Just show of hands, I'm just curious. All right, quite a few folks. And you got to meet somebody new, right? Or you got to connect with somebody that you already knew. And that is why the relationships and the networking is what so many of you said is why you're even part of this community. And so we're going to strengthen that and build on that today. So several years ago, the US Surgeon General's office was looking for a way to foster connection and cohesion among their team. And they did a lot of kind of the lame icebreakers. Who said that happened at work? Like they bring you some lame icebreakers, you're like, do we have to do this eye roll moment? Yeah, really annoying. We're not going to do that today. And so what they did is they found out that when they invited their team members once a week, at the end of the week, to share through pictures something about their life that was meaningful or important to them, and they did it for 5 minutes, that fostered trust and connection and vulnerability more quickly than anything they had ever tried before. And they called this the inside scoop. So we're going to do an abbreviated version of it today. And so in just a moment, I'm going to invite you to take out your phones. I know they usually tell you to put your phone away for stuff like this, right? Focus and pay attention. Don't look at your email. Which, yeah, don't look at your email. But just look at your photos. The text from home can wait, but just look at your photos. And what we're going to invite you to do is find a picture that represents someone or something that's meaningful or important to you. You can decide how you define that. And then what's going to happen is you'll buddy up. This only works in pairs. It does not work in trios. So for all the rule breakers out there that might be like, I'm just going to be a trio. No, just be a pair, okay? And so what you're going to do is each person's going to have a minute. And what I'll do is I'll let you know when we're halfway through. You're each going to have a minute to share that picture with your partner and to tell them whatever you want to tell them about it and about yourself. And then when you're finished doing all that, we're going to have y'all take a seat, and then we'll bring some of your voices into the room. Because some of you are going to learn and hear some interesting things, or there's going to be a coincidence. You're going to be matched up with somebody and like, I cannot believe we have that in common. There's going to be something cool that's going to happen out of this experience. And for those that are joining remotely, we have a way for them to do this by just typing a response into a tool. So if I were doing this exercise, the picture that I would share would be something that happened last year on my birthday. My husband and I are really into celebrating things. Like, we make a big deal. Like, in our friend group, we make a big deal out of birthdays and anniversaries and holidays. Like, we overdo a lot of things. We're big celebrators. And it was my birthday, and he gave me a gift card for a mani-pedi, which is always nice, right? Like, those always feel so good. My birthday's in July. And he said, you have a guest, a visitor, who's going to come and meet you. And I said, oh, this is so fun. Which of my friends took a half day off of work to get a mani-pedi with me? And so I'm in the nail salon, and all of a sudden, I hear he texts me, and he says, your guest has arrived. And I hear the bells on the door jingle. And I hear the words, happy birthday, Aunt Rachel. My little niece, Raleigh, whose second birthday I missed, came to celebrate my birthday with me. She's 7 now. And she asked me yesterday, we're moving tomorrow. By the way, we're moving tomorrow. We settle in our house tomorrow morning. I have not been stressed at all. And yesterday, she and her sister and brother were at our house, and she goes, Aunt Rachel, who's your favorite kid? I said, no, I'm not playing that game. And then she saw my slide. She was like, oh, you have pictures of me. I said, yeah, that does not make you my favorite. Like, don't go telling stories to your brother and sister. But that gives you a sense of, like, this is the kind of picture that I would show, okay? For those that are joining us remotely, just for the folks joining us remotely, we're going to invite you to go to this website, menti.com. The folks that are in the room, you'll have an opportunity to do this for another exercise in a bit. And we'll invite you to type in the code 2268 at the top of the screen and then 1798, and we'll just invite you to share these in a short answer and response. You'll have 25 characters, so for those that are joining us remotely. All right, are you ready? Yeah, oh, come on. Are you ready? Come on, there's some awesome people in here. All right, so you're going to find your picture. I'll give you like 20 seconds. Do not go back and look at 2014. Find something somewhat recent. Find something somewhat recent, and then you're going to find a buddy, turn to them. I'll give you 20 seconds until you're going to start, so we all start at about the same time. All right? And then there's going to be a minute countdown. So just again, find a buddy, pair up. If you see a group there, look at that. I love that right there. You're like, hey, there's 3 of us and there's 1 of you. We're gonna pair up. I love that. All right, I'll give you like 10 more seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, pressure, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Person, 1 share for a minute. I'll let you know when we're halfway through. Begin. All right, time to switch. Now your partner shares. Now your partner shares. So we're going to want to hear from some of you. I saw some smiles, I saw some laughter. And by the way, the folks joining us remotely, isn't this kind of cool? There's a little word cloud here, family celebrations, 5-month-old baby, Jason and Delaney, family, my daughters. Who wants to share? Who had a conversation with somebody you're like, well, that was a cool thing? Or here's something that something you had in common. Yes. Yeah. Surrounding yourself with people who inspire you and lift you up, right? I mean, that's we're talking about elevating and empowering, right? And that's such an important thing to do. Thank you for sharing that. Wow, completing her thesis. Let's give a round of applause for that. Okay. That's a lot of hard work. Wow. I love that. Inspiration is everywhere, right? If we're just like tuned in, even in a car wash, who would even imagine? Family. I'm guessing no one was like, check out my calendar or the email that I just got, right? Like it's probably not what you shared if I had to guess. Right? When it comes down to it, like what matters most, right? It's beauty and family and connection and friendship and maybe a furry friend. Anybody share a picture of a furry friend? Oh, a lot. Yeah. Okay. Where have you all been when I asked that question? Who saw a picture of like a really cute dog? I'm just curious. Okay. Wow. Hands shot up. Now we're awake. That's something that you can take forward with you and do with your organization, right? It's such a quick and easy way, and it's free, such a quick and easy way to connect with people, to connect with what I like to call the soul behind the role. And you get to know people in a minute. That you had a minute each to do that. And it's a really cool way that we can let everybody unmute themselves and let everyone show some part of themselves that makes them come alive, or that brings them joy or meaning or passion. And when we talk about things that bring us meaning or joy or passion, like we light up, don't we? Didn't you notice that? What did you notice about the energy in the room when we did that? Elevated, because that's what happens when we talk about what brings us meaning and joy. So feel free to take that back with you. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to look at 3 different ways to unmute ourselves. A lot of these are going to be focused specifically at work, but you'll notice that they apply to other areas of your life as well. So the first is elevating your essence and your confidence. This was little Rachel, circa about 8 years old. I was a very muted version of myself. I was shy, I was timid, I was guarded. I avoided anything that resembled performance of any kind. Even my uniform was black and white. I mean, there was a muted version in terms of how I showed up in my physical presence as well. And there were stories that I told myself that so many of us tell ourselves about how I thought people perceived me. These are negative narratives that we carry around. And maybe it's because someone said something to us when we were little, or maybe we had an experience, and then that experience we interpret to mean something, and then we carry that meaning with us our whole lives, and we never question it. And that's one of the things that can hold us back and cause us to mute ourselves and keep ourselves small and in a state of doubt. These were some of the words that I would use to describe how I thought other people saw me. I was not included. I was too much. I was a goody two-shoes, selfish, shy, bossy, demanding, not cool. I was too much, but I was also not enough. You know what that feels like, right? You're like, well, I'm too much for some people, and I'm not enough for others. I was too serious, I was intimidating, and I was not fun. These are some of the things I told myself about who I was. And so when I was rejected, or I wasn't included, or I wasn't invited, I was like, oh, well, that just confirms what I already thought about myself. And one of the things that I've come to learn and to realize is this. There's a woman named Danielle Laporte, whose books I love. She wrote a book called The Fire Starter Sessions. Awesome book that was a game changer for me several years ago. And I love what she has to say about the importance of how we show up. You will always be too much of something for someone. Too big, too loud, too soft, too edgy. But if you round out your edges, you lose your edge. Apologize for mistakes. Apologize for unintentionally hurting someone profusely. But don't apologize for being who you are. Don't apologize for being who you are. Maybe somebody told you were too loud growing up. You're like, well, just going to fly under the radar here. I don't want to be too much for anybody. And so we hold ourselves back. And several years ago, a year after I burned out, I was talking to a coach. Coaches are awesome. Anybody have a coach and you're like just curious? Like, coaches are phenomenal. They're so helpful. I hired one last year and it's been a game changer for me. And we were sitting at a Starbucks and she asked me 2 questions. The questions were, what shows up when I do? What qualities do I bring into a room? Now, I would not start asking like your worst enemy these questions. You might not get a boost in confidence by finding that out, though I would encourage you to do that later. And so we're sitting there outside of the Starbucks, and she says, I want you to make a list of about 8 to 10 people that you feel know you pretty well across different areas of your life. So, okay, made the list. She said, which of those people would you be most interested in talking to first? So I said, my friend Kara. She then presented these 2 questions to me. She said, okay, I want you to call Kara right now as we're sitting here. And you can't tell her why you're doing this. You can't tell her that you're working with a coach. You can't give any context. You just have to call and ask her these 2 questions. I was like, oh, well, this won't be awkward at all. So uncomfortable. Ugh. And so I'm sitting there in front of her, and I call my friend Karen. I said, hey, so I have 2 questions for you. What shows up when I do? What qualities do I bring into a room? And then I proceeded to do that practice with about a dozen other people in my life over the next month and a half. And I have to say that it was one of the most transformational things I've ever done, and I would encourage every single one of you to do this. It is scary to put ourselves out there and to ask for feedback about stuff like this, about how we show up. Because we carry the negative narrative of the worst aspects of how we show up, and we don't realize that other people experience us in fundamentally different ways. And so the words that I started to hear from people were calming presence and excited energy, which I was like, I've never experienced myself as a calming person, but okay, if you say so, I will not dismiss that. Courageous, nurturing, authentic, grounded, funny, refreshing, uplifting, real, disarming, and comforting. These were the things that people said thematically about how they experienced how I showed up. And instead of rejecting that, like so many of us do, what do? Someone says something nice about us, what do? That's nothing. We dismiss it. It's sort of like if someone's handing you a gift, and they're like, here you go. And you like bat it out of their hand. That's rude. Don't do that. When someone says something nice about you, no matter how uncomfortable you are, what do you say? Thank you. Okay, you already know. Great. We know this. We don't do it. We diminish, or we discount, or we dismiss, or we deflect. Own it. When someone reflects back the goodness they see in us, and we own that, and we stand grounded and confident in that, that is something that helps us to show up with greater confidence later. So be honest with yourself about the full truth of who you are, not just the things that make you feel insecure, not just the doubts, not just the negative narrative that you carry. That is not the full truth of who you are. There's a practice that is similar to this, but a little bit different, that you could also try, called the reflected best self practice. This is out of the University of Michigan, and the way that it works is like this. You would write down a list of 6 to 8 people that know you well across different areas of your life, very similar. But then what you would do, and this is sort of an easy way out that some of you are like, I am not getting on the phone and just cold calling people and asking them those 2 questions. If you're thinking that, you probably need to do it more than anybody. So I'd still encourage you to do that. But at the same time, if you want an easier entry point, you could do something like this, where you can write an email to those people and say, hey, I'm doing some personal, professional growth stuff. You can blame it on the conference and be like, I went to this conference and they told me to do this thing. And so if you could tell me about a time, could you tell me about a time where you've seen me at my best? What showed up? What strengths emerged? That's all you're asking. Can you tell me about a time where you've seen me at my best? Now, we often think that asking something like that is just really selfish and self-serving, right? Because we're told not to do that, especially as women. Just let your work speak for itself. It doesn't always work. It doesn't. It doesn't always work that way. And so by asking that question, and you can just copy and paste that email and send it to 6 to 8 different people. And what you do is you start to notice when those responses come back, what are the themes that you're seeing consistently? Don't think they're all lying to you, because I'm sure they're not. Notice your resistance to the kind things they say. That's a growth opportunity for you. And then you can literally write your own narrative based on the feedback they give, based on what they reflect back to you about how they experience you, about how they've seen you at your best. And you can write and repeat day after day that new narrative to yourself about who you really are so that you can become more confident based on the essence of who you are, not what you've accomplished. Because the words they're going to give you are going to speak to the essence of who you are. And that is something that stands true through time. Now, often when we're in those situations, right, when we're getting praise from people, getting recognition, what are we told? We're told not to do this, right? Like, don't toot your own horn. Don't do that. Guys do it all the time. Anybody work with a guy that does that? Did something good, let everybody know about it? Okay. Well, 2 can play that game. There was a study done by a group called Catalyst, and they found that one of the most effective ways for women to grow in their career, to have salary growth, and to increase their career satisfaction is to make their achievements known. That is one of the most effective things we can do, and it is one of the things that we do the least. I got to tell you, when I was working, I started as an intern at an employee benefits consulting firm, and I worked my way up to the National Director of Well-Being to a company of 2,500 people. Started a company of 40 people as an admin assistant. And I can tell you that the way that I got from A to B is because I consistently advocated for myself. I knew what I was good at, and if I did something well, if a client sent an email, have you ever had this happen? A client or a customer sends an email telling you how awesome you are. And then you just read it to yourself, and you let it sit there. No, I had a kudos folder in my inbox, and I dragged that over to the kudos folder. And then I would send it to my CEO and say, hey, I know that it really matters to you when we have happy clients or customers. Just want to make sure you saw this. It made my day. Done. It's like a subtle humble brag, but he might not have known otherwise. So you might have to do that, even if it makes you uncomfortable. And I made my accomplishments known. And that's something that I would encourage all of you to do more consistently. Our goal here is not to sit there tooting our horn and I'm the best, I'm amazing, I'm so great. That's not the goal. The goal is confident humility. It's to have self-assurance in the things that we do well, grounded confidence in who we are and the impact and value that we bring, and having the humility to ask for feedback and to ask questions and to go to the people that are hardest for you to get along with and say, hey, it's really scary for me to do this, but I would love for you to tell me maybe one thing about what shows up when I do, what qualities do I bring into a room. That will be an opportunity for you to tap into that sense of humility. Right, so this is how we connect to that sense of essence. So we're going to all have the opportunity to do this right now. I'm going to invite you to reflect a little bit first. For those that are joining us remotely, really anybody, you can start putting them in there. If you want to go to your phone and type in menti.com, website's at the top of the screen here, menti.com, 2268-1798. So everyone here in the room can do this as well. You're going to be, if you're in the room, you're going to be invited to turn to a different neighbor and share with them your response to this so that we can practice talking about ourselves and tooting our own horn in a safe setting, because it's just going to be you and one other person. And then we're going to bring some of your voices into the room, and we're going to invite you, anybody who wants to, if you hear something that a partner shares, like the master's thesis, right? I love how you shone a light on your partner. We're going to invite you to shine a light on each other too. So if you hear something that someone shares, you're like, that is awesome, then we'll invite you to do that too, because part of this is not just about elevating ourselves, it's about elevating and shining a light on each other, but they don't have to be mutually exclusive. We can do both. We can have that healthy, grounded confidence in ourselves, and we can also elevate each other. So I'm going to invite you to reflect on that. I'm going to put on a little bit of music, so if we can get this, make sure that this mic, a little bit of Mariah Carey, she's my girl. So as you come up with your response in the room, you'll turn to someone sitting near you and share what you typed in. You can elaborate a bit if you'd like. So if you're in the room, as soon as you have your response, I'll invite you to just turn to someone sitting maybe behind you, in front of you, and to share your response to that. Okay? So whenever you're ready, you can begin doing that. I'll give you a couple minutes to share with one another. And if you're joining us remotely, you can just respond to this question on the screen. All right, let's come back together. Would love to hear from somebody who wants to give a shout out, shine a light on someone that you talk to. Who wants to shine a light on someone that you talk to? Or who wants to just stand up and own it and be like, you know what I'm really good at? And just fill in the blank and own it. I know it's uncomfortable, but we're giving you permission, saying without being humble. So what I'm hearing is a really strong sense of values. That's really grounding, and that's something that can fuel our confidence, right? When we're really clear on what's important to us, on who and what is important to us, that is something that can fundamentally shift the way that we show up and how people experience us. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Isn't it nice? Can't you tell when someone's really paying attention and when they're not? We can all tell if someone is actually paying attention to us or just faking it. And that gift of presence is so powerful because, at the end of the day, all of us want to feel seen, heard, and like we matter. And when someone is fully present with us, I would encourage you over the next couple of days to really be mindful of that. There's so many things that are tugging at our attention all the time, but when we're fully present with somebody, that is one of the greatest ways that we can show honor and respect to another person. It's by being present. So I love that share. Yes? It's so important, now more than ever, right, to feel like you have a sense of support. And that's what a lot of it is, right? A sense of support, a sense of flexibility, a sense of options. That's really empowering, too. I mean, that's a really great way to empower people, so I'm glad that you shared that example. Yeah, I love that. I love what you brought up makes me think of something I like to say, which is that we're often blind to our own brilliance. Like, we are. We're like, oh, that's easy. Yeah, for you. Right? Okay, not for me. Right? And so we diminish it because it's easy. But the thing, notice what's easy. Notice what's easy. That could be a reflection of your strength, right? When we do things that are naturally a source of strength for us, they tend to be a bit easier. Somebody else might be intimidating, right? Or how do they do that? And you're like, oh, I just do it. So when someone acknowledges something that you take for granted, receive that too. So I'm glad you brought that point up. Awesome. And just to show you all, so we can bring some attention to some of the remote folks too, positive attitude, elevate and connect others in a room, bringing energy to a presentation, being honest and showing grace. Can we clone you? And can we put you on social media? No. Being thoughtful and self-motivated, tenacity, thoughtful, calm, and helping others. What a great group of people. Dedicated, doing way more than what's asked of me. My calmness in difficult situations, that I actively listen and help someone put their struggles in perspective. Ability to problem solve in many aspects of life, not just at work. Being a bright light with my inspirational posts. Coming through to support the needs of others. Connecting, coaching, nurturing, problem solver, open to feedback. Great networker. Good listener. Disarming in the middle of crisis. People feel safe and vulnerable talking with me. Look at what a beautiful group of people. Celebrate your strengths. Celebrate your strengths and what you do well. Don't hide them. We're told, don't hide it under a bushel, right? Right? Let it shine. Let it shine. When we think about our strengths and how we can show up, the question we want to ask ourselves is this. There's a book I read several years ago called The Art of Possibility. Really fantastic book. I like to read a lot. If you ever need reading recommendations, I'll happily send them to you. If you message me on LinkedIn, I'll send you a reading list of all my favorite books. How can I be a contribution today? Can you imagine how different the world would be if everybody showed up with that intent every day? If we said, how can I be a contribution today? And we showed up from that place, and we acted, we took action from that place. Because when you think about what your strengths are, those are the resources that you have to show up with to be a contribution in the world. And so I would encourage you to be mindful of that on a daily basis. How can I be a contribution today? Maybe you could join a committee. Maybe you could join a board. Maybe you could become a mentor. Maybe you could do something that helps to benefit another person that you normally don't interact with or engage with. Perhaps you could just notice if someone here is looking lost in the next 2 days, that you could approach them and say, hey, is there anything I can help you with? Or if you notice that if you're sitting down at lunch and someone looks like they're walking around looking for a spot, that you would say, hey, we've got a spot over here. Because nobody wants to walk around the lunchroom and have nowhere to sit, right? We're still all 12, right? So be someone who is a contribution to somebody else's life in some way, that when they leave an interaction with you, they feel filled up as a result of having spent time with you, like being present, right? That's a way that you can be a contribution. So the second thing we want to do is to BYOA. We know about BYOB, right? Everyone knows about that, right? Okay. BYOA is to be your own advocate. Be your own advocate. A lot of the times at work, we've heard about this. Every women's conference, I feel like it's necessary that you hear the words imposter syndrome, right? Who would like a reframe on that concept? Anybody? You've heard it ad nauseum. Okay, please, yes. So I was listening to a Brene Brown podcast. Anybody Brene Brown? Love Brene. Oh, yes, this is a room of Brene lovers, of course, duh. So I was listening to one of her podcasts, and she was talking with these two women who have made a decision to just fundamentally disrupt this concept, and I love it. And what they've said is we need to stop pathologizing syndrome, something that is a normal human experience. All of us have doubt. Raise your hand if you've ever experienced self-doubt, ever. Okay, great. This is a normal human experience. Or if you're starting a new job and you're not really sure what's expected of you or whether you have what it takes or whether you can cut it and you think maybe they screwed up and they shouldn't have hired you because if they really knew that you don't actually know what you're doing, they would kick you out tomorrow. Anybody ever feel this? Okay. There is a knowing laughter in the front row here. Y'all can have a conversation with this group later. We do this to ourselves unnecessarily. It's not helpful. It's not helpful. So instead of pathologizing, turning a normal human experience into a disease, like you all have a syndrome, how about, no, like I'm experiencing doubt. That's a normal part of what it is to be human. When we experience doubt, we have a choice. We can either just like kind of hide and hunker down, or we can choose to reach out to people. Who notices that when you experience doubt, sometimes your response is to reach out to somebody else? That's a healthy response to experiencing doubt. So we want to shift away from having this idea that we are somehow imposters. I like to say that we are not imposters, we are in process. You're not an imposter, you're in process. There's a phrase I heard that I loved, I hope it doesn't insult anybody, but it's, you're just temporarily incompetent. So if you like to think of imposter syndrome as, oh, I'm just temporarily incompetent, then maybe you feel a little better. Because it's not a permanent state, you're figuring it out. So as we think about these ways that perhaps we have doubted ourselves and held ourselves back, I'm going to invite all of you to think about this. We're going to have another chat and connection with each other. Because by the way, we don't learn, again, the best just by hearing somebody talk at us. We learn the best when we have our own moments of self-reflection, of insight, and of connection with other people. Don't you notice that about yourself? That you learn your best when you are invited to make something personal and to apply it to your own life. That's when you get a learning that's really meaningful and sustainable. So what we're going to invite you to do, and there's a way that the remote folks will be able to join us on this too, and invite you again to find somebody different that you haven't already connected with, which may require you to get up, and that's fine. And again, you're going to be in pairs. And invite you to think about a time when you silenced, doubted, or muted yourself at work, or held yourself back in some way. What happened? Why did you do it? If you know why you did it. How did it feel to do that? Bless you. How did it feel to silence yourself or mute yourself or hold yourself back? Is it something that happened, maybe it happened 5 years ago, maybe it happened 2 days ago. Maybe you're still dealing with it right now. It could be something past or present. A way that you've silenced or muted or held yourself back in some way. For the folks that are joining us remotely, and this is just because y'all in the room are going to be talking about this with each other, so if you're in the room, you don't need to do the phone version of it. But if you're joining us remotely, what's one way that you have or you are silencing, doubting, muting, or holding yourself back in some way? Okay? So again, I'll invite you to reflect, put on some music to invite you to reflect on this individually. And then you'll be invited to share with each other. You'll have about 3 or 4 minutes to share with one another. And again, this is a moment of vulnerability, but when we're collectively vulnerable, it's a little easier, right? When everyone's going to have to share something that they'd rather probably not share, that they maybe haven't told anybody else before either. We start to build our collective courage when we do stuff like that, okay? So, if you'll reflect on this, take some notes for yourself if that's more helpful. But as soon as you have an answer to that question of think about a time, think about a time, let's go. I like my divas, okay. As soon as you're ready, you can begin. Tell a story about a time you held yourself back or muted yourself at work. Now, would love to hear in kind of like a brief phrase, and I'll do my best to repeat back. So if you could stand up and speak up, to use your biggest unmuted voice. If you share something, I'll do my best to make sure the folks that are remote can hear us as well. What's something that came up in your conversation? Maybe a theme that you noticed, or a way that you noticed that you mute yourself or hold yourself back in some way? Second fiddle. Working with men and being second fiddle. Head nods, laughter. Yeah, you're like, duh, Rachel, you know what industry we're in, right? Yeah. Yeah. What else? Yes. We need to be able to speak up with our strengths because we make assumptions. Oh, they know that. They saw that I did that. They know that I'm good at that. They see the value that I contribute. Not necessarily. Why? Because most of us are just focused on our own stuff, and we're not necessarily looking around to be like, what is everybody else doing that's bringing value, right? We're just trying to make sure even people at the very, very tippy top of the organization, even the people that are like those male executives that seem so, right, confident and assertive, may not actually be. They may be covering up an insecurity. Y'all know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, we can have a whole session on that, can't we? Yes, that's what happens. We make assumptions. Yeah. Stay in your lane. Who's ever sort of felt, even if someone didn't say it to you directly, anybody ever felt that? Like, stay in your lane, not your place, right? Know your role. Okay, well, if there's something you can contribute, one of the things you can do, you could say, hey, I realize this is a bit outside of the scope of what I normally do, but would you be open to hearing a way that I think we can improve a process here? Most reasonable human beings will at least hear you out. Now, you may be laughing if you're like, I don't work with reasonable human beings. Then you may ultimately have to decide if that's a place you want to stay, candidly. Okay? I'm just being honest. What else emerged in your conversations? The way that you're muting or holding yourself back? Yeah. Owning your worth. That's what you're like, you are worthy. Like, I am smart. Like, you is smart, you is kind, you is important, right? Like, it's like, remind yourself of that every day, right? We need to hear that, right? We need to remind ourselves of that and to be willing to say, you know what? No, I know this is what's right for me. This may not have been what you think is right for me, but like, let me tell you why I think this is the right fit for me. And to advocate for yourself and speak up and own that. And to not be in this position of like, oh, I should be so lucky they hired me. They should be so lucky they have you working for them. Right? And this is a talented, smart group of people. They're lucky to have you. And if they don't treat you right, they should not be surprised when they lose you. Right? Yeah. You know? So I appreciate you sharing that because it can happen in different parts of the spectrum. Sometimes when we're younger, we have this kind of unbridled, unfettered confidence, and we come into the space and we're like trying to own it, and then other times that can come later in life after we have experience and realize, well, the way of silencing myself, the way I was doing things wasn't working, so now I'm feeling empowered and I'm going to speak up and stand up because I'm sick of this. We get to the point where we're just like tired of it, right? And maybe later on in our career, we're like, I'm going to do or say something now because I got nothing to lose. And we start to get more emboldened. Yeah, anything else anyone wants to share? So I'm trying to repeat back just some of the gist of what I'm hearing. So the kind of the crux of, did I capture the crux of what you had said? I just want to make sure I did.
Yes, you did.
Okay, great. That's my goal is that everyone hears like the headline. And if you want to chat further, if you're like, hey, you shared something earlier that I'd find this person at lunch, be like, tell me more about that story as an opportunity to connect further. Is there anybody else that wants to share? Yeah, let's take one more. That's a yes to that. I mean, right? We put that on ourselves. We try to hold it all together. And the body, there's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score. Anyone read this book? This book is a phenomenal, every human being, everyone with a body should read this book. It's a book on trauma, really, but all of us have experienced it to some degree, and it's about the connection between the mind and body. The body does keep the score. It knows. And you can feel it, right? You can feel it. You know when you're holding yourself back, and you feel like that tightness in your throat, or perhaps you feel your heart racing more, and you know it. Your body sends you signals of like, you are not supposed to be silent right now. And look at that as an invitation. Get curious about what your body sends you, when your body sends you those signals. Yeah, we'll take one more. It eventually, who's experienced that? It eventually comes out. It eventually comes out, and it's usually the people we love the most that can take it. Like, you can handle my crazy, so. My boss ticks me off, and I'm just going to make it your problem. You got to own the situation that you're in. And if you're in a situation that is depleting and defeating you and burning you out, you need to own that and make a decision. Speaking from experience. 3 years ago, I made a decision to leave that job. That's what I needed to do. My dad's an entrepreneur. My mom's an entrepreneur. I have it in my blood and in my bones. I was never going to be happy unless I was working for myself. That's not everyone's story, but that was my story. And I was resisting it for years and years and years and years and years. And then once I decided to take the risk to do something on my own, to do the thing I've always wanted to do, then like a whole new world of possibility and opportunity opened up for me. And my health improved, and so many other things in my life became better as a result of that. So I appreciate so much wisdom. You notice the wisdom in the room? There's so much wisdom in this room. So much wisdom in this room. So another thing that we can do, I mentioned feedback earlier, but when we think about being your own advocate, I'm going to share with you 3 questions that you can bring back to your organization to ask with the people that you work with. Because the reason this is important for women, now hear me on this, the reason this is important for women especially is because typically when women ask for feedback, the feedback they are given is more vague than what is given to men because they're afraid of hurting our feelings. This is one of the reasons I don't get feedback. They're like, she's going to be emotional, which is not fair. It's not fair that we get labeled that. but it's the reason why we have to be very specific with the feedback we ask for. That practice, by the way, is called benevolent sexism. Just like a total oxymoron to be benevolent sexism. They're just trying to be nice. But it's one of the things that's holding us back. So here are 3 questions that you can bring back with you to your organization to ask people that you work with. What specifically am I doing well? What's working? What specifically could I do better or differently? And then if you want a really, really laser-focused, pointed question, what's one thing I could change that would make a meaningful difference to you? If you consistently start to ask for this feedback and put yourself in a position of being humble to receive it, and then if you consistently get feedback that points to a growth edge that you have, and then you take action to change it so that you can be more effective in your interactions with people, people are going to trust you more, they're going to respect you more, and they're going to want to include you more because they see you as somebody who has the humility to ask for this kind of feedback. Now you might think, I can think of some people in my company that need to ask these questions of me, but we want to start by leading by example, first and foremost. Okay. The reason this is important, asking for feedback is important. The reason why, if we're struggling and having a hard time, why it's important is because it's one of the things that can help us to most build trust within our organizations. There was a study that Brené Brown mentioned in the book Dare to Lead. Surveyed 1,000 leaders, and they asked them, what do your team members do that most earns your trust? And the thing that they said consistently was when my people ask for help, because it demonstrates that they have a self-awareness to know where they perhaps don't have a strength, or where there's a limitation, where they don't know something. Now, I would encourage you to do as much as you can to problem solve and to find solutions and to arrive at your own answer. But if you're really, really struggling and you don't know how to do something, or you're not sure how to approach something, that you would go to someone and say, hey, I'm working through this thing. I really respect and trust your opinion. Could you weigh in on this for me? What would you do if you were me? What would you do if you were me? People love being the expert, especially people with big egos, which I know none of you work with. So put yourself in that position of, again, being your own advocate by asking for the help that you need. I would also encourage, as we round out this section and go to our final section for today, is to think about who is a male ally I could align with at my organization. Who is somebody that I trust and respect, that's very important, that you could go to and say, hey, look, who here's ever been cut off in a meeting? Who's ever been interrupted in a meeting? You've been talking in a meeting, you're sharing something, you get cut down, interrupted. Yeah, that sucks, doesn't it? And it makes your blood boil, right? Like, who do you think you are? I got something to say. So what I would encourage you to do is to find a male ally at your organization and say, hey, look, when we're in a meeting together, you may or may not be aware of this, but sometimes this happens. Like, I'll be sharing something, or I have an idea or a suggestion or a comment, and I get cut off. I'm sure no one has an ill intent. Benefit of the doubt. Even though if in your mind you're like, this person's a total jerk and I hate working with them and I know they're just doing it to spite me. Keep that to yourself. And just say, hey, when you notice that happen, could you do me a favor? And could you interject and say, hey, I know that Karen was sharing something earlier. I just want to make sure. She had made a really good point. I want to make sure that she's heard. Karen, can you repeat that? Get somebody in the room at the table to be an advocate for you. They're not speaking on your behalf. They're just bringing attention to something that other people are probably overlooking when you're getting cut off. So think about who could I, even jot the name down right now, who is somebody within your organization or somebody within your network that you could go to and say, hey, could you help me with this? I notice this thing happens. I notice I get cut off. I notice I don't get the opportunities I want. Could you be someone who is an advocate and an ally for me? And to reach out to them. The last thing that we're going to focus on today is, and we've kind of touched on it a little bit, is about being courageous. So I was doing a workshop with a group of women leaders in the building and construction space a couple of years ago. And I asked them to write on a little card at the end of the session, what piece of advice would you give your younger self? And what I noticed is, as I was getting these responses back from them, I noticed there was a theme. There was a consistent theme. All it was an open-ended question, not multiple choice. What is some advice that you would give your younger self? And the most consistent thing that people said across the board was this: don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to speak out. Don't be afraid to stand out. Don't be afraid to be wrong. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask for help. That's what the advice they gave their younger self, which, by the way, is still relevant to your older self. Is don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. There's a book, I probably mentioned like 6 books today, I know, and like I said, feel free to, if we're not already connected on LinkedIn, feel free to message me. I'll happy to send you a list of some of my favorite books, all of the ones I mentioned today. There's a book called The Power of Regret by Dan Pink. I read it earlier this year. And one of the things he says, over time, people regret what they didn't do more than what they did do. Regrets of inaction are far more common than regrets of action. So often we get to the end of our life. He said, I could make a business, a travel industry business, for all the people that regret not studying abroad in college. Anybody have that regret? I'm just curious. Anybody like, look around the room. I wish I'd studied abroad in college. Or I wish I had gone for it. Regrets of boldness are one of the most common regrets we have. I wish I had been bolder. If only I had taken that risk. If only I had gone for it. If only I had tried. If only I had put myself out there. Regrets of boldness are one of the most common regrets that we have in our lives. And you can choose not to by taking action, by being someone that steps courageously into the things that you want in your life. There are people less qualified than you doing the things you want to do simply because they decide to believe in themselves, period. That's it. They're no more qualified than you. And they're doing it because they decided that they could. That's it. A few years ago, 6 years ago, I was asked to do my first national keynote at a wellness conference. And I had been in the well-being industry for a while. I was a health coach. But there were other people in that network that were nutritionists and dietitians. And I was asked to speak on the topic of nutrition. And I could have thought to myself, you are so not qualified to be on stage doing that, Rachel. They should talk to the licensed health professionals. But they said, no, we want somebody who's giving non-prescriptive advice, and you have a really powerful story about your journey with healing your body through food, and that's what we want to hear. We don't want someone who's going to be prescriptive. And so what I decided at that time was this, that an invitation is an indication of a qualification. If you are invited to the table, if you are invited to that role, if you're invited to join that committee, don't assume they made a mistake. Borrow their belief in you. Borrow other people's belief in you. It can be really, really powerful. You are more, I bet you the people in this, you are more than qualified. You are more than qualified. Just say yes. Allow yourself to be temporarily incompetent and decide that there's nothing wrong with you. One final story, we're going to do one more reflection, and then I've got, invite some questions. And then end with something that'll be a little quick and a little fun for all of us. I was doing a workshop with a group of project managers, 200 project managers for a global consulting firm a couple years ago. And we were talking about beating burnout and being your best self. And there was a woman who reached out to me on LinkedIn a couple days after the session, and she said, I've already made a huge change in my life. And I was like, I think I'm good. I don't know if I'm that good, but okay. So she sends me this message, and I said, well, what happened? And she said, well, I'm a single mom. And I have to travel for work between the Mid-Atlantic and down south, and I'm constantly going back and forth. And I knew the job had travel, but it's just really taken its toll on me. And there was a question you asked in that session. Who gets the best of you, and who gets the rest of you? Who gets the best of you, and who gets the rest of you? She said, I took that question home to my partner, and I talked to them about it. And it made me realize I needed to do something different in my job. So she said, the next day, I went to my boss and I asked for a change in my role to be rolled off of the travel job so I could just be based in the Mid-Atlantic. My boss said yes. She said, Rachel, I slept better last night than I have in a year. Because she stood up for herself so that she could have more time with her family. She unmuted herself and made a decision. Mama Oprah tells us, right? You get in life what you have the courage to ask for. You don't ask, you don't get. The worst they'll say is no, you end up back where you were in the first place, or you'll have more information that'll help you decide what your next step's going to be. If they say no, maybe it's not the right place for you. Then you're in the driver's seat to make that decision. So what I want to invite all of you to do, and then we'll open it up for some questions. I want to invite you to think about, imagine it's 1 year from now. And we'll just have you all do this kind of quietly, and take out your phones, and to respond to this. It'll allow you to respond multiple times. You respond once, and it'll allow you to submit, and then you can respond again if you'd like. One small and simple and one big and bold action step that you've taken to get unmuted that you'll be celebrating. Imagine it's 1 year from now. Imagine it's 1 year from now. It's June 23rd, 2023. That's kind of cool, right? What is one small and simple and one big and bold action step that you have taken to unmute yourself? You can decide whether that's at work or whether that's outside of work. That's your decision. But what are you going to be celebrating? What are you going to be celebrating? And again, the code is at the top of the screen. Menti.com, 2268, 1798. I would invite you to be as specific as possible. Like, really imagine yourself a year from now, sitting in that same seat. Small and simple, big and bold. Step that you're going to take. Voicing opportunities and wins more. Take the vacation. I've had people leave these sessions and book 2 vacations. I'm like, okay, get on with your bad self, do that. Took a designer position and opened myself up to a new relationship, focused on my personal well-being, don't give up, asked for positions department manager, being present with the ones I love the most for the things that matter to them. Voice my opinion more on what we should be buying for our lines, ask for a promotion, advocate for my vision in an academic context, not allow professors to push me around. Work on being more confident, sharing my earnest opinions, not just what others want to hear. Say no. More than one of you needs to hear that. Opening up my own consulting firm and working on my terms, living in my dream home, happier in my job because I've spoken up for myself, ask for a raise and mean it. Be able to say no and not feeling bad about it. I wrote my book. Yes, you did. I'm with you on that. That's one of my goals for the next year, too. It's powerful, right? When we take a moment and we pause and we reflect and we think, what do I want my life to look like a year from now? We don't do that enough. What do I want it to look like? What would it look like for me to take big and bold action? And what's one little thing I can do right away to start to build my confidence? Every single one of you has the capacity to do that. So I just want to open it up and see if there's any questions that anyone has specifically that I can acknowledge and respond to. Yes? My diet that changed my health. I'm happy to, if you want to message me on LinkedIn, I'll send you more about that. There were certain foods that were causing like sensitivities in my body that I was having lots of issues with, and so I'm happy anyone that wants to, again, message me on I'm on Instagram as well at Unmuted Life. I will respond. I personally respond to all the messages. I'm like setting myself up for this now. You're going to be like, oh, Rachel, you're going to be busy. But that's okay, because I really value this. Like, it's a privilege to do this work. And if you have questions for me, I want to answer them. I might not get to you in the next 24 hours because I'm moving tomorrow morning. Hey, but into my dream home with a pool. I got a pool boy, too. He's my husband. He's a teacher, so he's off in the summer. But I will gladly share with you some of the books that really helped me with that. But yeah, good question. What other questions are there? I have something I'll share about. Somebody asked about the promotion thing. If your boss is in the room, tell them to put their earmuffs on. But yeah, who do I go to personally? Yeah, I have a business coach that I've hired, so I go to him. I mean, like earlier this week we had a call, and I was like feeling really down and discouraged. I can't even make up the number of health issues I've had, from a cracked tooth to just issues with my back to an ear infection, all this stuff, traveling, moving. And so I just needed him to like shift me out of my mindset that I was in. Even though I do this stuff, like even if you do this work, you still struggle with this stuff, right? Like, let's not pretend. And so he's somebody, we have a call every other week. And so I made that decision. It was an investment that I decided to put into that. So he is somebody that I go to for that. I'm also in like for instance, when it comes to like facilitation, I've been in communities of people that do facilitating. I was in a professional speaker training, and being around those people, they were really affirming and validating. So being in community of other people, I would do a lot of work with HR because I worked in benefits. So being involved in an HR community, whether it's SHRM or Hacking HR Alliance, depending on where you live, I'm happy to connect further about that too, of other communities that I found that have been helpful. And I think part of it too is just looking back for the proof in your past. So I intentionally, like I said, I journal a lot. I'll save if somebody sends me like a kind thing either on LinkedIn or in an email, I'll print it out and I'll tape it in my journal. It's like a scrapbook. And I have that in there for myself that I can go back and those are like my prized possessions. Like, if your house on fire, what would you take? I'm like, my 25 journals, like they're. So that's one of the things I do is to consistently do those kinds of practices of self-reflection, of really absorbing when someone says something that is kind to me, really taking that in, like taking in the good and sitting with it a little bit longer. And then having a business coach has been a really powerful and helpful thing. I know some people have anybody have a life coach? I'm just curious, my life coaches. So look around the room too, if you see somebody whose hand is up and be like, let me talk to them, right? So even talking to other people in this community and just in conversation at meals, like, hey, do you have a life coach or a business coach that you work with? That would be, I don't know, is that somewhat helpful? Okay, yeah. If you're asked to do things that you're like, I'm not qualified to do this. Did we talk about that today? So one of the things I would encourage you to do is think about which of those things does feel most accessible to you, right? And say, okay, they asked me to write a blog post. What's a blog post? Well, it's just writing a narrative about a certain topic, and we can Google, right, like how to write blog posts. I mean, I'm not saying this to like be dismissive, but I do use, if there's something I don't know how to do, I'm like, okay, I'll go to Google first and say, what is something, like they're asking you to do it because they think you can do it. Being part of this community is really powerful. Who's somebody in this room that's written blog posts before and done stuff with social media? Show of hands. Show of hands. What I would encourage you to do is in conversations with people in here, and what's your name? Michaela. So if someone sees Michaela in the next 2 days and you have experience and confidence, raise your hand if you'd be willing to sit down and have a conversation with her about what's worked for you. Look at that. That's how you do it. You tap into a community of people that are in your space, that have done this before, and you ask them, what did you do? And then they will help you. Right? You'll help, right? I'm seeing nodding heads. They will help you. That is how you do it. That is how you did it, right? You had to find people. You had to figure some stuff out yourself, and you had to ask people for help that knew what they were doing. That's what I would suggest. Yes? Yeah. Say, hey, I would love to do that. However, I need to get training how to do that. I got so much training out of my company before I left. Like, truly. I did. I was like, if you want me to do that, I can only do it at the level you want me to do it if I'm trained. So yeah, that's another great suggestion. Another woman can as well, and absolutely. I think it helps to have both, potentially. So that's an excellent point. So having both is really helpful. If you can have another female ally who's somebody who's respected within the organization and say, hey, look, I know you probably had the same struggles I did. There's a relatability factor there. So I would encourage you to ask that. And then also, especially if you're in your group that's, I know, this industry, like heavily male-dominated, right, to say, hey, look, to have it, tackle it from both ways. And you can ask multiple people. You could ask 6 people if you want to. It doesn't have to be one person or 2 people. Have as many advocates in that room as you possibly can. So that's a great question. Is that answer helpful? Okay, cool. All right, y'all. This has been, can you believe how quickly, hopefully this went by quickly for everybody today. If you want to stay connected, that'll take you directly to my LinkedIn page. I'm on there all the time, posting things, singing things. I know some of you are already connected. You saw a picture of my broken tooth on there 2 days ago. If you did. But as we close, I want to invite all of us to collectively unmute ourselves in the way that brings me the greatest amount of joy, so selfishly. It brings me the greatest amount of joy. And it's a way that I muted myself for way too long, way, way, way too long, because I was too afraid of what people thought. And I was too insecure about it. And so what I'm going to invite you all to do is to stand up as you're able. Stand up as you're able. And we're going to do something to warm up our voices, okay? And then we're going to have the WithIt choir do a little fun thing together. All right, I'm going to invite you to get like a Polynesian warrior, to put your hands in kind of like that right, like yogi position. And then if you can, do a little bit of a squat. We're going to do a practice called Hutta. And this is a great way to activate your like energy and your voice. I know you're all like, Rachel, I didn't expect to work out here. To activate your energy and your voice, and it's going to sound like this. It's going to sound super weird. When we all do it together, it's not weird, okay? It's going to sound like this. It's going to come from your belly, okay? Hutta, 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 hutta. Hutta. Do this with me for real. Hutta, 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 hutta. You feel it in your belly? Hutta, 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 hutta. Okay. And now what we're going to do is we're going to remind ourselves and each other to let it shine. Okay? So Care Bear stairs, stand up tall. I want to hear your voices. I want you to believe it. I want to believe it. Here we go together, okay? This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine.